So thank you very much. Sorry.
No problem.
Thank you very much for this interview. So my first question: what's for you? What is good music, or what is good music composition?
Well, what is good music composition? I would never judge what is good, what is bad, but I will try to answer. With my students, I'm very much concerned about being authentic. Music history, as well as social and political history, is filled with expectations and given rules. I call it models. There are composers which follow and support models. Mm-hmm. And there are composers which try to overcome the models, if not to create, which is the ideal case. It is a dichotomy of an author versus avatar. I call it author versus avatar. Models can use us to replicate themselves. They use us as avatars. Then it is not anymore a composer writing music, but musical models writing a composer, using him, standing in his, her place. I find it sad and dangerous. It leads to a certain depression, but it is not only about purely musical models also, because composers create in music societies of sounds, hierarchies, minorities and majorities, and music projects certain political and social systems and ideologies, and listeners receive even unconsciously our composers' ways of handling the material. Music is toxic. There are no ready-made or given instruments how to compose and what is music in general. I always say that composing music is each time composing what is music. And the history of music in general is the history of such permanent reformulation of music as a matter. So for me, if to come back to the question, so for me, good musical composition is probably the one where I see composer is conscious and careful about such matters, where composer is rather author than avatar.
Yes.
And it's important that such problems stay not in sounds or other surface categories of music, but rather before the sounds or after the sounds. And if we speak about the territory before the sounds, I call this territory the initial motivation field. So the composers who are based and concentrated on this initial motivation field, most probably for me, producing the, let's say, good music. But it's very, I would never say good or bad, because even for bad, there is always a reason. Mm-hmm. And I respect this reason.
And what is your musical signature?
Well, musical signature. It's hard to say, and probably it's not for me to say about that. Sometimes I'm reading texts on my music, and I'm surprised of the variety of ideas and meanings people find in my music. I would say more precisely, people encode my music, or whoever music, with their own meanings, expectations, and experience. And probably the openness for such a variety of encoding meanings could be named as my signature. I don't know. It was always important for me not to dictate
yes.
what one should or not receive or understand or feel. I believe the listening is an active creative act. Mm-hmm. When we listen, we compose what we hear. So all the listeners are composers of the music which they receive. And it is not a passive position of receiving information, receiving signals where to cry or where to laugh. It's rather about generating information.
Well, it's sometimes open, right?
Huh?
So it's somehow, I would say, open music or open meaning music, right?
Open meaning music, yes. Trying to avoid the concreteness of narration, the directivity, etc.
Could you give like one best example where, for example, like which represents you or this particular idea which you would like from your all pieces?
Well, no, I will not mention one piece as a particular case for such, because more or less since many years, I'm mostly concentrated on such cases, so I could name whatever piece more or less successful result, but it is the basic ideas which I'm concerned with. So. Oh, okay, let's take the Riot of Spring, for example,
okay,
which can be found at my YouTube easily, so you can name this piece.
Okay, and what is your way of composing, right? Okay, with what you start and what are the stages which you usually go through?
Mm-hmm. Well, in a way, it's always different, and in a way, it's always the same. The starting point for me is always I don't know what to compose, how to compose, and especially why to compose. If I receive a commission to write, for example, string quartet, I start with questioning this very situation. I'm writing a string quartet. I really ask, I place question mark after each word of this sentence. I writing a string quartet, then what is concert situation? What are the relation of listeners and musicians, of musicians and text? What is notation, etc., etc.? And starting to find the answers to these basic questions is my starting point in many cases. For example, by the way, if we speak of concrete example, the Riot of Spring, I come back, the questions were, what is the figure of conductor nowadays? Who are the people in the hall? What are the relation? What is these concert situations, etc., etc.? And these questions at that time, it was 2013, they were generated, provoked, I would say, by the special political situation which happened in Moscow by that time. It was time of protests. And it was at the same time, it was the 100 years of the Riot of Spring of Stravinsky. So it was my reflection also on what is folklore and what can be kind of revolutionary gesture towards what we receive as a folklore. Nowadays, I took rave electronic dance music as a folklore of nowadays. And then step by step, I'm finding my answers, or rather I'm finding a way to articulate these questions in my music, which I find more important, not to give answers, but to question.
But this whole process of questioning, so it's more like conceptual or more experimental. So you do some prototyping, or you just it's more like thought and information gathering process.
No, in my case, it's really thinking about some even not purely musical questions, which step by step receive the form, the musical projection, the ideas start to sound musically. So for me, I'm starting by reflecting
Got it. So you just as I understand, you challenge yourself, right? And challenge
Exactly.
context. And from this challenging process, you start building at the beginning some, let's say, concept, and then this concept turns into
yeah. In most cases, it is like this. Yeah.
And like looking on yourself, like 10 years, like 10 years ago, right? How your musical idea or how your perspective is changed?
Actually, not so many changes. I was much more attached to concrete, what I call surface material, sounds, rhythms, structures, formal organization, etc. But I always felt it as a problem since very beginning. I was always trying to articulate, to realize where I follow a certain model. And I was always trying to escape these external models which come from music history or wherever. And in a certain moment, I found, like 10 years ago or something like that, I found myself engaged into my own models.
Yes.
So I started to leave my cage step by step in very different direction. And mostly it is kind of incoming, it's coming inside myself. So if in the beginning it was very fixed and structured composition, then I came to open forms, to graphic notation, text scores, performances, or whatever, this kind of experiences, which again, in its turn, started to provide the possibility to come back to the fixed situations and to find solutions, keeping in mind the experience which I got from this coming out of the cage, finding new solutions to create kind of fixed situations which can be shared and discussed and analyzed.
So it's constantly challenging, right? Constant challenge, what you do, right?
Yeah. I last years, especially, I find it for myself the most interesting. I really don't need actually to be to feel safe in a very formulated and solid stylistic, let's say, walls. And I feel solid in this pre-sound, pre-compositional field, which is for me the most important point. And as the experience shows, that this pre-compositional field is very much hearable and visible.
Yes.
It is possible to project it in real sounds and in real concert situations.
And what you fear the most as composer?
Fear.
Yes.
Well, no. If to speak about fears, then I would not split the personal fears and the, let's say, professional fears. Fears I don't split. Because as the composer, anyway, we project our personal fears and neuroses to our listeners. I think that my fear is to lose this inner need of doubt. Of doubting, yes. Because I believe and I see that no doubtness brings wars.
Yes, so it's no doubtness. I understand, right, from your previous what you said. So you need to doubt your own models, right?
Yeah.
And process of being composer for you is just let's say distracting all models and creating constant movements, right?
It's not distracting. No, it's not negative situation. I would say it's constructing, but it is questioning, each time questioning. Yes, I believe that there are no ready-made situations, no ready-made instruments to compose and to reflect your compositional ideas. All the instruments must be composed together with the sounds. Actually, the sounds is the let's say, the ending point of this process.
Yes, got it. And why you still compose, right? This is a question from one another composer, right?
Why I still compose? Well, it's quite easy because for me it's the most natural way to reflect the world. So it's my, like, I have an arm, I have head, I have leg, I have my music, and it's part of me. So it's very natural way to reflect the world and to find ways to articulate and to in a way fix and send it as a message. Materialize.
Yes, yes. And what's like the biggest, let's say, like the biggest impact, source of impact for your music, of changes? Let's just, technologies, I don't know, some kind of cultural ideas, right, which are changing, or I don't know, your some kind of personal events, or.
Yeah, the biggest, of course, is personal events and my personal reflection of the situation, which we become the contemporaries of. I won't say influenced, because I'm not a fan of being influenced, and it is one of these kind of modeling questions. I'm trying to be conscious when I'm influenced. At this very moment, I stop to be composer, I start to be kind of projector of some outer situations. But what I'm interested, for example, if we speak of technologies or whatever, I'm interested in this means, in how is possible to deal with them, with this means or any other means, without serving them.
Yes, got it.
Without becoming a slave of them. I'd say it is another challenge for us to articulate and solve this author-avatar problem.
Yes, but do you, I don't know, because for example, some other composers, right, they just code on yourself, right? They code their softwares, right? Or they build their own hardwares. There's different ways how you can deal with this. What is your way? How you deal not to become too much dependent on or locked in particular?
I'm doing the same. I'm not very much into programming and computer music in general, but I work with good friends who sound artists and programmers who assist me in very special and concrete ideas which I share with them, and we work on these programs. So in a way, it's collaborative work. Of course, in this collaboration, there is a strong exchange of ideas happens, which I find very important in a way. And anyway, it's not only a user situation, but this situation of just pure user of certain software or means can be also interesting, and it's important to reflect it as, in a way, social and political situation, when we become users and just using the existing means of representation.
But regarding technology, and what was the biggest, let's say, the biggest hardware or software which shaped you the most, right? I don't know, maybe it's laptop, right? So that everybody has a computer and now you can make, I don't know, visuals on your own, or some kind of
sure. It gave a lot of possibility to reflect more fields of our presence, in life. But I'm not very much I'm not very much concentrated on this, and I'm not absolutely optimistic about the situation of having software, even of having, I don't know, the notation software, because even simple and or advanced notation programs, they enclose us into the possibilities and impossibilities which they provide, and unconsciously we are somehow become this a little bit in a way dictated after the possibilities of this software.
So
So for example, one of my possible step away of this situation, I composed several music on software which is not meant to be a musical software like Excel or whatever, some text and scheme programs.
got it. So it's very interesting. Can you just tell us a little bit about music composed in Excel?
Yeah, it's almost the whole cycle of maps of non-existent cities,
Yes.
like Bludenz, like Paris, like Nizhny Novgorod, and many others. There are more than 10 titles. They are mostly composed in Excel. Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah, because I had a need to write schemes, and that was the best way to do it. If I concentrate only on Finale or Sibelius, then I will not even be able to do it.
Then what kind of softwares do you daily use? I don't know. Do you use some notation or softwares or not, or you do only with your own hands? Or
No, I rarely. The sketches I do by hand. The sketches in my how it calls the Moleskine notebook, and it's mostly kind of small proportional drawing, some ideas and some very abstract things. And then when I come to the necessity and when I'm ready to fix the score, actually I have the piece in its entireness in my head and in my sketches, and so I decide which software will be correspondent to the ideas of notation which I have. And actually less and less I use notation software, but more and more I use text scores, Excel, etc.
got it. It's very interesting. If Kourliandskis would live not in Moscow but in Berlin, let's say, would it be a different composer?
I lived in Berlin for 1 year and a half. It was 2008, 2009. I can say if Berlin changed me a lot. No, that was not my point of change.
Yes.
Real. It was, I would say, rather my point of improvement of what I was doing by that time, at that moment. But when I came back, when I changed back to Moscow, in a couple of years, I started to change. But it happened not because I changed from Berlin to Moscow. It happened mostly because the way I was composing by that time, kind of starting to be too close, as I said before. Yes, and I was really needed to change my optics and to zoom on smaller idea, not smaller, but to on more concrete and basic ideas of what is composition. And that was my change. And Berlin was one of important steps in my biography. I mean, mental biography, yes, because it was a very important experience.
And looking back, right, 25 years back, and not particularly on your music, but in all new music field, how it's changed to your mind? What's the biggest changes?
For me?
Your perspective on new music, maybe not so much on your music, but but on the whole field, right?
Yeah, okay. I think that this turn from concrete, let's say, from collective thinking idea of compositional schools, idea of certain traditions, collective traditions, aesthetics, etc., start to be less and less important. The individuality and the trials to find very personal approach to and the trial to perceive the outer world, the outer situation in a very personal, unique way becomes more and more important. And it happens not only on the level of music, but in society also. All these multi-level emancipations of
Yes.
different kind of communities, and which come to the importance of one single individuality. It is something which happens really nowadays and since decade or 20 years probably. And what is important, the same thing happens to the audience. Actually, the relations of the audience to new music also changes a lot these days. And I think that if to speak about the audience, for example, in a way, composers, and probably one of the most important things which composers do, in a way, composers compose the audience.
Yes. What do you mean by that? It's very interesting.
Yeah, it is because if we don't follow the expectations which come from outside, if we follow it, then the audience composes the music which composers create. But if we really challenge ourselves, challenge our personality and trying to find the authenticity, which is probably impossible, but it is possible to stay on this way and always go into these questions. Then we propose the audience very special situations, each time different situations, yes? And when the audience meet these different situations, actually these people, me also, I'm a part of the audience of the other composers, we become different to ourselves because we are not anymore the same as we were before we met this other, let's say, which was created and formulated and formed by composer or an artist or whoever, yes? Mm-hmm. And actually this idea of composing the audience, changing the listeners, yes, it is a part of our artistic responsibility, and it is also part of the reason of the problem of contemporary art acceptance in society, because it is often seen as an aggressive act. They want to change me. They want me to become different. But some feel it as a challenge to experience new territories and thus to know more about themselves and about the others. And actually the art and music in particular introduces the other. And I feel that the last decade, it tends to be more, the audience tends to be more open for such experience, to meet the other. And when we meet the other in concert hall, yes, it's a kind of our preparation for meeting and dealing with others in the real life outside the concert, the safe concert situation.
Yes, but when you are saying to meet other, you mean a completely new experience, right? So audience needs to deal with completely each situation is completely unique. So that's the idea, right?
This is, yes, let's say the pure idea is like that. Yes, because creating creating a new score or new piece of art, whatever, it is creating the other, yes? And perception is meeting this other. But when we meet the other, we change ourselves. We become other to ourselves. And this is, I think that it is one of the social and political functions of art in general.
And this is like otherness, right? This is like, as I understand, right? This is like in this year, in this last 10 or even 25 years, we see that there's some kind of new, let's say, new kind of festivals, new things where music could be played, right? So it goes from traditional concert halls to new places, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then the music brings always new languages, right? From multimedia. This all is the idea of other, right? Just to create a as new, other previously not experienced experience, right? Is this what do you mean? Yeah.
Yes, but I would underline that I'm not speaking about the means. It can be multimedia, whatever thing, but deeply traditional and conservative in the way, in the, let's say, this initial motivation field. Yes,
Yes.
it can reproduce the existing and models of what is art, of how it functions, of how it communicates with the audience, etc., etc. So I don't speak about the means. I believe that, let's say, traditional, I can imagine even tonal language can be sometimes much more contemporary, much more experimental and radical than some, let's say, on a first glance, experimental types of music and art. So it's always question of not of the sounds and of the means. It's
Yes.
question of why and what.
Yes, got it. So some deeper level behind science.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
And like in
And I would, if you permit me, and I would say that that the sounds, yes, these surfaces which we deal with, they stay just in front of us,
yes.
and they pretend to be the ending point of what we deal with. But I believe that, and actually it happens in music and in the perception of arts in general, that the idea of listening and idea of perception is to try to overcome the surfaces, to try to forget about sounds, because the sounds are more and more fetishized in composers and music society, and it gets kind of value just by itself. But the most important for me is dealing with what is behind it, what is or before it.
Yes.
Yeah.
And how you see how is the audience has changed? Whether they are the same audience was 10 years ago, or it's completely new one, or maybe there's ideas that they're just disappearing, right? The audience becoming less and less and less.
No, this I don't feel. I feel, well, I experience quite a variety of audiences, and I have chance to experience the Russian audience, which is very different from the general European audience. It's because in Russia, in Moscow, it is very young, very enthusiastic, and I would say that it's participative audience because they are ready and to come on stage to improvise together. They, after the concert, they ask where we can study about such kind of music, about such kind of way of playing, etc. And there are many laboratories for people who are interested in such experiments, and these are mostly young people, not musicians, who come and who sometimes they become part of new experimental groups, and they create the core audience of Moscow general contemporary music stage. And but at the same time, of course, in Europe, what I meet and what everybody meets, it's aged, audience. But let's say when I first met these 70 plus minus 10 audience, let's say 24 years ago, they were 70, okay, 60 plus minus something. But now, 24 years later, they are still 60 plus minus something. So it is not a question of losing the audience. It's just a certain social marker that in a certain point of the biographies of the social kind of presence, people turn towards the concert halls and often towards the towards the experimental corners of this stage. So I don't feel the big difference. It's more or less balanced what was 20 years, at least in my experience, and what is now. And so I feel, let's say, I'm more or less relaxed and positive about what's happening. And in a way, if we speak about 20 years ago, well, the social media, the YouTube, the Facebook, etc., they just came, yeah, and it is new audience and quite active audience, and we deal with them, and we receive letters, etc.
Just sorry, my godkids just.
Yeah. No problem.
So, what's the like biggest trends in new music, or what kind of new where you see where these trends are going? Let's say, what will be new music in 25 years later?
Whatever we can imagine. Life is able to correct or even cancel our expectations,
yes, of course. Yes.
As it happens right now. The important thing is not the situation itself. The important thing and the state of music or whatever arts itself here in certain points of history. The important thing is how we deal with the situation, and if we are ready to deal with these changes in general. And here, with this readiness to deal with with unpredictable, changeable flow of history, here the individuality, I would say, appears. It is not in sounds or in rhythms, as I said, but it's in this initial motivation field. And in 30 years or whatever, if we exist, this field of motivation, this initial field, will, I would say, stay the same. And if we concentrate on this field as a starting point for our reflections, etc., we will be ready to deal with whatever challenges which come from outside.
Yes.
In far or close, near future. It's only question of being ready for the changes and to prepare the mechanisms of acceptance and relationships to whatever comes in future.
Yes.
So I will not tell what will be, but I will say that what is important is to be prepared to whatever.
Yes. To be prepared for huge uncertainty, right?
This is for sure. This is in a way, it is the safest situation in a way, but it is the most complex at the same time situation. Yeah.
And how you see, what's the role of new music in society?
As I said, yeah, music arts in general introduces to us the other and reveals our abilities to interact with it. And it is very much about such abilities of the societies in general. So this is the function. This is let's say I speak about this, not obligatory experimental, but about the music, about the art which questions this territory of motivations, yeah, which doesn't deal only with surfaces of objects and sounds, and such kind of music and art creates the complex, opens the complexity and opens the individuality of perception. And the more complex situations are provided by the complex, I say, I don't know if it is really complex, but let's say new, different other situations is provided by the art, the more individual ways of dealing with it will appear in perception. So the more artistic becomes the perception, because I believe, as I said in the very beginning, that perception is artistic institution. Let's say it's like there is music, there are visual arts, theater, whatever, and perception as a standalone, very creative territory of human activity, artistic activity.
What would be your like 3 suggestions to young composers, right? Those who starting their career.
Yeah, it is always very personal because there are no general suggestion for, there are no collective keys, yes, to open all the doors. All the keys are personal. So it depends, but for sure, probably for now, the only, let's say, universal, probably, yes, I'm not sure, but the only universal key which could be probably found is this way of questioning every situation and every gesture you produce. Sometimes we do it just inertially, without thinking why we do and how we do. And if we question what we do, suddenly we can realize, because I was taught to do it, or because I was told to do it, or because I even don't give my attention to what I'm doing. I do it just by inertia. So if we question, here in this questioning, the individuality appears, and it is most important because the more models press us from outside and the more models and rules start to dictate what and how to do, the faster we come to a deep depression. And what I see in my teaching experience, that the biggest depression we meet with the very highly skilled students who are taught how to deal, and they are mostly in depression. Why? Because it was not their own unique key, and not their own unique instrument. They take someone else's situation with them, and it's really press personality.
Thank you very much for a great interview. So it was.
Thank you. Yeah, it was very nice to talk.